Roger, one of the questions that I would have that some people may think is obvious is, how do I know I'm me? I have all these different sensations that are running in. How are they bound together? And then over time, all of my molecules, my cells keep turning over, and so 10 years from now, none of my molecules are the same. What maintains the me in this whole process?
You're really asking one of the great questions of human existence, of course: who am I? And different disciplines give different answers to that. From a neurological position or perspective, we are and we maintain our identity because of the very nature of the brain and its capacity for setting up circuits that continue to reverberate in habitual ways. But of course, if we look at it from other perspectives, if we look at it from, say, a social perspective, then of course our identity is determined and reinforced over time by factors, for example, as economic factors. If I'm a poor person, if I'm a rich person, that sets up a very different identity which can mark us for life. Then there are cultural factors, the shared beliefs about who I am, a man, a woman, and what this means about who I am and can be, etc. And then there are the very interesting questions, those are kind of objective, external perspectives, but then there are the internal factors too, the subjective factors. We know that psychological factors and habits within us work to create a firmly established sense of identity, which we get very uncomfortable with change. Just as we don't like if our environment changes too much. One of the things we discover in, for example, psychotherapy is people don't like it if their self-image changes. So we have psychological defenses, shall we say, to perpetuate and maintain our self-image. But notice that word, our self-image. Now that's a very interesting word because it suggests that there's something, that what we're taking to be ourselves is actually an image rather than what we really are. And then finally there's the contemplative or spiritual perspective. And what gets really interesting here is that these traditions, which are based on centuries of people doing very intensive inner exploration of the mind and of identity, tell us that actually what we usually assume ourselves to be isn't who we really are. They tell us that we have taken a self-image for ourselves, and that we suffer, each and every one of us, from a case of mistaken identity. Yeah. And what they tell us is that when we turn attention inward and look very carefully, we find that actually we are the awareness or consciousness or mind or soul or spirit or Tao, lots of different names, which is witnessing that little self-image. So they invite us to a very radically different identity.
All right, I think I hear 5 levels here. We have a neuronal level, a psychological level, a personal spiritual level, an interactive social level, and then a cultural level. Is that fair to say? And all of these contribute to our sense of identity?
I think, yes, in some ways they're level, in some ways they're different domains, but yes, all of them seem to feed into our sense of identity and maintain it.
Now, neuroscientists in general would claim that all of the 4 levels above would all be reducible to neurons in some complex fashion, and so each of them really don't have a real input into the sense of me, because the sense of me, ultimately, all of that has to be expressed in the pattern of a whole bunch of neurons firing in your cranium.
Well, of course, that's a classic reductionist argument. And of course, the physicist would say that the neuroscientists are just composed of little quarks and atoms that are running around, and the neuroscientists' explanations are just the result of random clashing of atoms. So you can take any of those reductionistic arguments down to an ad absurdum level. But anyone who knows something, for example, about systems theory appreciates that no account of a higher level can fully be given by a lower level. So that, yes, It's absolutely crucial for us to know as much as we possibly can about the brain. But no amount of brain science is going to tell you about the effects of cultural enrichment or deprivation, or of beliefs about what it is to be a man or woman, for example. So, yes, in fact, what you're pointing to is one of the great traps of all intellectuals. We all tend to think our little field explains it all, of course, which is a way of making us feel good, but may not give the whole picture of reality.
Well, let me extend that further now. On the other side of the spectrum, you would have some philosophers and many theologians who would say, sure, all the things that you said, all of those levels are involved, but in order to really have personal identity, I need to have some substance, some immaterial substance. Call it a soul, if you like, in your culture or whatever. But human beings need that immaterial substance in order to maintain personal identity.
And I would go further and say we need all of them. You know, you can't have a personal identity without a brain or without consciousness. And now we recognize you can't have it without a culture either. That who we think we are is actually very much determined by the cultural input we've received from birth up. You know, the idea that a person can live in total isolation is a myth. We are interdependent.
Certainly agree on the cultural side. I think that is new material that needs to be inculcated into our belief and our understanding. But the question is, that is a physical explanation, and the sociological is physical. But the theologians would say, now we have to add something that's not physical, something immaterial, in order to really make sense out of this whole picture. Do you agree with that?
Let me say that my ideas have changed dramatically over time. And whereas I formerly believed very much along with the reductionistic camp that the brain and atoms explain it all, as a result of my own both personal exploration in contemplative practices and of a long-term study of contemplative and spiritual literature, I've begun to think that there's a lot more to our reality, and that no adequate understanding of human nature can be obtained without an appreciation of the contemplative or spiritual, and that a full picture will have to take all these domains into account.